Hello, hello. I am Karen Jean-François.
And I'm Cecilia Oliveira.
And this is the Women in Data podcast.
Every other week, we bring you conversations with inspiring women who are shaping the world of data.
We dive into stories, explore challenges, and share insights and learning to help you navigate your own career in this exciting field.
And sometimes it's just the two of us, candidly chatting about our experience or topics we're curious about. Let's get straight to it.
Hi everyone. This is a long overdue episode, I have to say. We are talking about imposter syndrome. At the Women in Data flagship in March, all the attendees in the networking space seem to be talking about imposter syndrome. It is said that about 70% of adults will experience imposter syndrome at least once in their lifetime. So today I'm bringing you a two-part conversation to help you overcome it. In the first part, I am joined by Holly Wall, a data governance analyst who candidly shares her personal battle with imposter syndrome. In part two, Michelle Hall, a data leader and career and leadership coach, to offer invaluable advice on how to conquer these feelings and unlock your full potential. I'm joined in this first part of the episode by Holly, who I've met, Hi Holly, who I've met at the conference in a very funny way. So we were around glasses of wine and then Holly just dropped the bomb that she's working in funeral services. And I was thinking, how on earth is that possible? And obviously wine means that we were all giggling and talking about it. And I thought Holly needs to be on the podcast. But one thing that really marked me is that Holly came and said, you know how everyone is talking about imposter syndrome right now? I can't have imposter syndrome because I am an imposter. So Holly, welcome to the Women in Data podcast.
Hi. Yes, no, I remember it well. I think what I said was, what do you do if you are just an actual imposter? And then we got talking about, funeral planning. So shall I just kind of say who I am and do all that bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Please introduce yourself.
Cool. So hello. So I'm Holly, and as Karen said, I work in the funeral planning industry, which surprisingly does actually involve a lot of data. So I started in my team as a data analyst. So that was lots of kind of ad hoc SQL analysis and building dashboards in Tableau. And the funeral planning industry became regulated a couple of years ago. So there was lots of work by everyone to kind of, get reporting ready and get all the systems working properly so that anything that had to go out to the FCA was going to be accurate. And then more recently, my role's changed a bit. So I'm now in data management more. So trying to get the quality up to scratch, badgering people to get business definitions, documenting, lots of trying to document things that are either not documented or in weird places and people's folders and stuff, and just generally, putting out whatever fires come up along the way. So that's kind of what I do, but it was actually surprisingly hard to kind of sit down and go, right, what actually is my job? What actually do I do?
Yeah, I feel your pain. But can you tell us a bit about your imposter story?
Yeah. So I suppose the reason that it kind of came up at the end of the conference was that, and it was such a good day, and it was kind of, you had this whole day with all these hugely inspiring women talking, and it was great. It was a really good day, but it was like, at the same time as being amazing, it was also, and I don't want to say intimidating because that's not what I mean, but kind of daunting. Because you're in this place and it's full of people who really seem to know their stuff. And I'm just aware, like I studied English literature and illustration, and I fully intended when I was younger to just be a starving artist. And then like ended up finding my way to data through, I was working in a horrendous call center, and just the only thing that I could do. So it started off that what I would do to kind of keep my sanity was kind of doodle on notebooks. And then they said we weren't allowed pens and paper. So then I would doodle on Microsoft Paint. And then I got pulled up for that because I was just terrible at my job anyway. And then I would start kind of essentially doodling on Excel. And then through kind of years of just doodling on Excel while I was studying and working this horrible job. It just ended up that I didn't actually kind of learn Excel, but I taught myself a lot of stuff in it. And then when I, escaped from the terrible job, in my kind of next roles, I ended up being the person that people would go to for Excel problems. And then that kind of slowly led into, I was the one doing the kind of reporting in big inverted commas. And then a job came up in the data team. And then suddenly I was a data analyst, which was amazing, which was great. But at the same time, it's really hard to shake that feeling of, no, you don't understand. They've given me this job, but I'm just the person who knows Excel because I was bad at my call center job. Like, it's so that could definitely kind of stuck. And I'm aware that, when I'm trying to do something on SQL, half the time I have to use Google to just check what I'm doing, or to kind of find a better way, or I'll write a big bit of code that then takes 45 minutes to run. And I need to spend a lot of time trying to work out why that's happened. And I don't necessarily know the right words, and I'm just kind of making it up as I go. So this has come up before, where people talking about being in meetings with people with data backgrounds and the kind of gremlins on your shoulder, and just being very aware that they all seem to know what they're doing. And I know that I've just spent the last hour trying to figure out how to structure a data catalog, or maybe even down a rabbit hole trying to figure out what even actually is a data catalog and how do I make one, But then on the other side of that, and I think this is what I really came to when I was thinking about this episode, is that I'm also aware, and I really hope this doesn't sound terrible, but there are so many people that you meet, and I don't want to say it's always men, but all the examples I can think of are men. And I want to be clear, not the wonderful people I work with, but people who seem as though they know exactly what they're doing. And then when you get under the surface and you start to look at what they're doing, it actually doesn't make sense. And I'm like, you're an imposter too. It's just that there's something that you're doing. There's some kind of confidence that you have that makes it seem like you're not. And I think it's, that whole kind of fake it till you make it, that kind of idea. I think that I understand that as a concept, but I'm a terrible liar. So I don't think I can follow through on something like that. I suppose.
I can absolutely relate on the terrible liar side of things. So I hate to say fake it till you make it, because if I try to do that, then you're definitely going to know that I'm lying and I'm pretending.
Exactly.
But everything you said, I hear you. And do not worry about having to Google SQL stuff, because I've been coding with SQL for over 14 years now, and I still have to Google stuff. So
okay, that is really good to know. Yeah.
we all do it. And I just love your story. For me, it's a great transition story. So, you started in a whole different field that was not working for you. And then you moved into data little by little, one step at a time, and then got yourself into this role where you're actually now the data person. And Cecilia ran an incredible series over the summer. So that was in August, where she was highlighting women who transitioned from a different field into data. So anyone who's transitioned, into data from somewhere else and have not listened to that, I highly recommend it. I think more and more nowadays people are moving from other areas and into data, and it's very important that we recognize that you don't have to start by being a data analyst or a data person to actually ace your work in data. So I have no doubt that you're doing an incredible job, Holly. And I have myself had my fair share of imposter syndrome. Many of you would have heard my stories about walking into a bakery being like, I don't think I should work in data. Can I come and work with you on a Saturday to see if I should be a pastry chef or something? That was crazy. Do not do that. It's a bit intense, but this was my way of realizing that yes, actually data is where I want to be. And for me, something that was really, really helpful in that situation where I was feeling like, oh my God, I can't see anyone that, I don't like to say look like me, because we're all different and we all look and behave differently, but I could not see anyone I would feel like, oh, I want to be like you when I grow up, let's say, or I want to have a similar role. And I was feeling so foreign in the field that I was really feeling like data was not where I should be. And I was feeling like I was doing a horrible job, being passed for promotions and all these kind of things. But something that helped me overcome that, outside of obviously using the community and talking to different women, was understanding my imposter. So I read this book that's called Secret Thoughts of Successful Women, written by Valerie Young, so Dr. Valerie Young, and she describes 5 types of imposter. So you have the perfectionist, you have the superwoman, the soloist, the expert, and the natural genius. And well, I'm not going to describe everything because we won't have time for all of that. But that book was really great in helping me understand, okay, where does that come from? And it comes from childhood, really, for me, understanding who are these voices in my head that are telling me I am not where I should be. And understanding my type of imposter, recognizing this, I guess the symptoms and all these things really helped me at least say, okay, this is what I'm experiencing. This is why. Get over it. So that was very helpful. And I think now is a great moment to bring in the amazing Michelle, whom I've met. Did we meet a year ago, Michelle? I can't remember.
It was about a year ago.
Time flies. So Michelle's been making such a big difference in my life, in the way I see things, that I thought it would be incredible to bring her on the podcast to talk about imposter syndrome as well. So Michelle, can I invite you to introduce yourself?
Thank you. Hello. Thank you for having me on the podcast. I'm Michelle Hall. I'm a career and leadership coach for women, particularly women in data and digital roles. And I'm also a data consultant. In my over 25-year career, I've worked for several organisations, both here and you can probably detect an Australian accent where I grew up and did my degree. So I did I had some work experience before I moved to the UK. I think I actually had a data career long before the term data career was coined. 20-something years ago, we were talking about IT careers. And data wasn't really even mentioned. It was more about the systems that we needed to run the business rather than the data that those systems would house and rely on.
Yeah. And then you moved into coaching as well.
And then I've moved to coaching as well. So definitely through my different career transitions, there always has been a moment of imposter syndrome. And even this morning, if I'm brutally honest, I caught myself procrastinating and thought, what's going on? Oh, I know what's going on. We're recording this podcast. I'm having moments of, should I really be doing this?
Yes, you should.
Which I've learned over the years is an absolute indication that my imposter or my inner critic is having a little field day of, who are you to be doing this? And I think we all have that from time to time. Or most of us.
I agree. And so you've had, as you mentioned, you've had a few moments of imposter syndrome, this morning being one of them. And I have to say, I could not dream of a better person to come and talk about that on the podcast. So to not feel like the imposter. If I have to say anything, I should be the imposter on this podcast. But can you tell us maybe one of your stories of feeling like an imposter while you were working in data?
Absolutely. So I think my biggest one, the moment I became acutely aware of having imposter syndrome, was when I started working for a Big Four consulting firm. And I can remember saying to one of the partners in my interview, my words at the time were, getting an interview with that person at that company in that building was more than I ever imagined for my career, let alone being offered a role there. So right there, you can hear the imposter syndromes creeping in. And when I got the job, I was absolutely elated. And so were quite a few of my family and friends. although someone asked me what was I going to be doing there, was I going to be an executive assistant to one of the partners? Because what could I possibly consult on? Talk about taking a pin to my big balloon. So that was kind of the first, see, you don't really belong because so-and-so thinks that as well.
Yeah.
But it wasn't really until I got my security pass and my laptop and started on the first day. And the first day of working, in my experience, in a consulting firm, particularly a Big Four, is they do sort of, I think it was a week induction program with a ton of networking. And the imposter syndrome got worse through that week and worse afterwards. And every morning as I approached the security gates, I was convinced that my pass was not going to work because someone would have figured out that I didn't belong there because I wasn't good enough. Because who was I to be a management consultant? Because I was just a girl from Brisbane with a state school education and a Queensland University or University of Technology degree, and I did not fit in here. So in my mind, the pass would have been turned off overnight. I'd try and get through the barrier. An alarm would be sounded and I'd be escorted from the building. Now, when I say this out loud, it sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? I mean, I can even laugh about it now. And I don't think that would happen even if I committed something really serious like corporate espionage, which I have to say I wouldn't even know how to do that. But there probably wouldn't be that level of drama attached to someone committing corporate espionage. But my big challenge was I did not identify as someone who was good enough or smart enough to work there.
Yeah, and I was laughing because I just had a very big visual of the alarm going off and you're running around being like, oh my God.
Security guards with guns escorting you away.
You see what I mean? And this is part of the thing. The moment, not sort of the moment, but we can very quickly go from being quite in control or appearing to be in control to this catastrophizing, dramatic scenario in our head where we end up goodness knows where. I mean, at one point I had myself floating on a life raft in the middle of the ocean because that's what would end up happening to me. I mean, so that's just completely ridiculous and unrealistic.
Yeah, but such a powerful story. And thank you both for sharing your stories with us. I mean, it just shows the extent that how this impacts our life and our career really. And hearing, especially you, Michelle, the voices of other people telling you actually you don't belong here and then adding to your own imposter, is not helpful. So it just feels like women in the workspace, we are very prone to experiencing the imposter syndrome. It's not just a women thing, but we live it on a whole different level sometimes. And I would love, Michelle, to have your view on that.
I think you're definitely right when you say it's not only women who suffer from imposter syndrome. Men absolutely do as well. And there's research to back that up. And in my own experience, doing a quick survey of the team that I was co-leading a couple of years ago, 8 out of 10 felt like an imposter some of the time. Of the 10 people in that team, only 2 were women. Both of us put our hands up, by the way. So there's that. And what I do think for women is it's multi-layered, as you say. So where a lot of us are raised and educated in a patriarchal society, and there's more and more information now about that and about men realizing that the societal construct is not working for any of us. I think as girls, we're sent very different, if unintended, messages than are sent to our brothers or our male colleagues when we're students. Certainly in my experience growing up, the boys were encouraged to take more risks, to stand their ground, to be really clear about what their boundaries were. Being loud was accepted. Taking up space was accepted. As a girl, a lot of the time it was, you're so pretty. And if you could just lower your voice because you're getting a little bit aggressive.
Yeah, and I feel like the "you're so pretty" kills me all the time. It's I grew up in a family of girls. So my mom has 10 siblings, only 3 are men from that. And when they say I'm proud of you, the majority of the time is, "Oh, you're so pretty, I'm very proud of you." And I'm thinking, this is not an achievement.
No. No, it's not an achievement. And I think in the context of data careers and women in data, if we go back to the Second World War, women were the largest trained workforce in the computing industry, which sounds great, except they were because they were seen as cheap labour, or we were seen as cheap labour. And in fact, women were used in the advertising of these massive big computers that were around in the 50s and 60s. Marie Hicks is a technology historian who was cited in an article in The Guardian a few years ago. And the idea behind putting women in the adverts was computers are expensive, but jobs using computers wanted to be portrayed as easy and only requiring cheap labour, and cheap meant women. We don't have time to unpack all that today. I mean, that could be a whole year of podcast in itself.
Yeah.
But there was a shift in the 70s as the governments and businesses realised the power of computing, and let's couple data into that as well. So they weren't going to put women in charge of such powerful machines because we were considered low-level drones, which is ironic when you think about now how powerful we understand drones to be. And therefore women were phased out. It's funny, right? Like they're low-level drones, and then 30, 40 years later, we're actually spending a lot of money and time and energy developing drones to do some really sophisticated things. So women were phased out. Then they were replaced by men on larger salaries with more impressive titles. And what we're still seeing, as you both know, women are underrepresented in STEM roles, and I'll couple data into that. And less than 17% of girls take some STEM subjects at school.
I don't want to kind of interrupt here, but that just really resonated with me with being in school, and I loved graphic communication, and I was good at it, but my teacher was one of those men who just didn't think that I should be there. And I remember him saying to me one day, because I'd kind of complained about him being sexist, and I remember him talking to me about how when he used to work in the kind of draftsman's office, that they always used to get women in to do the kind of meticulous little drafting because that's what women are good at. And I think he thought he was giving me a compliment about like, there's a role for you here. And it was so infuriating. And I was, 15.
And you grew up with that in your mind, basically, after. Yeah. And Michelle, do you have any tips on how we can overcome this imposter syndrome?
Unfortunately, there isn't a silver bullet for this. I mean, if you Google imposter syndrome, in fact, don't do that. There is so much research out there. A lot of it is very conflicting. It's all quite confusing. There is literally stuff about power poses. And you can do all the power poses you like, and they're helpful in the moment, but they're not going to solve it for you. I mean, trust me, because I tried that. So that's not going to work.
I think the only times I used to use power poses a lot in the past, but that was when I was doing athletics. And bear with me. So I was a hurdler, and I always had this habit. It was kind of my ritual. So very stressed before a race, legs shaking. You do not want to have shaky legs when you're hurdling. That would end up really bad. So I had my power pose. So my back to the hurdle, so I couldn't see the hurdle, and doing the superwoman kind of pose. But this is the only moment why it was working, I have to say.
So that didn't fix all of the imposter syndrome forever, no?
And Karen, you know my thoughts about encouraging women to be superwomen. It just doesn't work. We really need to move away from that. But that's a whole other conversation too. So you asked how we overcome it. And I think the good news is there are some things that we can do for ourselves. I really like Claire Jose's book, Ditching Imposter Syndrome. She has some really good tips in there. But also, I think getting some control over your inner critic will help. So that's the voice that starts up with not so much the who are you, because that's more of an identity level thing. It's, see, I told you couldn't do that. I told you that wasn't going to work. And it is a bit of the who are you. But it's recognizing those thoughts, trying to tame them and reframe them. So at every point in our career, we are going to have to do something for the first time. And I think particularly in data, because a lot of the work that we're doing is uncharted territory. There are things where there are frameworks and there are data catalogs, although that's a fairly new thing as well. But our roles are not like a solicitor, say, where law has a common law precedent. There, a lot of the times for us, isn't a precedent to follow. So we're in uncharted territory. You don't need to know everything. You're not going to need to know everything. And no one does know everything, despite what the gurus will try and tell you. So I think having a page in the back of your notebook, or if you use an electronic notebook, it's something like I made today great page, or a success page, or I'm brilliant because page, basically whatever you want to call it. It's a page that you go to on a weekly basis and jot down the things that went well that week and what you learnt that week, compliments that you received in the week. Or you could also have you could have an email folder. I've got one that's called Kind Words from Other Folks. So when I get an email, it goes into the email, into this folder. So I've got it to go back to on the days where I need a bit of a boost. And I think doing those two things is great for sort of helping with taming the inner critic and recognizing on an identity level, although there's a lot more work to unpick around that, is having that right in front of you to keep going back to. And it makes life so much easier when it comes to performance reviews as well, because you're not sitting there panicking about what you need to talk about in your performance review from the last 3 or 6 months.
Yeah, absolutely. I might steal the idea of the email folder.
Yeah, I'm going to make it as soon as we're off this call. That's lovely.
I think another really helpful thing is asking for help. So keeping stum about it is not going to help. I've spent as I said earlier, over 25 years in corporate. So I know that talking about imposter syndrome is a bit taboo because we don't want to admit to it. But we have got to the point of being able to talk more about periods and menopause at work. So surely we can start to open up conversations about imposter syndrome and developing the psychological safety within our teams where it is okay to do that. And we can support each other through those moments of feeling like an imposter.
That's a very hard thing. So I want to say, yes, let's open the conversation and have that. And I know that as a manager, if someone from my team comes and tell me I have imposter syndrome, I will do everything in my power to support them. But as a team member, I would be terrified to go and say that, especially if I'm thinking about promotion and all these things. I'm thinking that will hurt my progression. So how do you actually bring up this conversation without feeling like it's going to hinder your progression in an organization?
That's a really good question. I think in the first instance, we need to talk about it with people that we can trust and that we feel comfortable with. So a flippant comment about it over the coffee while you're getting your coffee every morning is probably not the best way to go about it. But where you do have a good rapport with your manager, and in a one-to-one, that's an ideal time to bring it up. In a situation where I was co-leading a team a few years ago, someone actually brought it up in a team leading workshop and was really specific about, I feel like an imposter specifically in these situations. So not all the time. And the person that brought it up was by far one of the most technically savvy, and technically literate people I knew, and was amazing at solving complex problems with the tools that we were working with. But when it came to specific client interactions where he didn't feel like he had all the information and that everyone in the room knew more than he did, that's when his imposter syndrome crept in with, who are you to be doing this? Who are you to be here giving advice?
Yeah, that was really great to bring that up.
I know. And that's what made us, or that was sort of what instigated the conversation in the team about, oh, okay, who else feels like this? And then what can we do about it?
Yeah, I love that. So you just need one person to be brave sometimes and open the conversation, but also make sure that you have this trusted relationship with your managers.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
So we're reaching the end of our episode, and thank you so much, both, for, as I said, sharing your story and sharing advice as well to overcome the imposter syndrome. I would love to hear, Michelle, is there, so I know we just talked about, every week think about what you've learned, the great thing that happened, etc. But is there anything that you would want the listeners to start doing straight after this conversation?
I think the easiest thing to do is get that page in your notebook and actually set aside time each week. It doesn't need to be an arduous activity. It could be something that you do in 10 minutes on a Friday afternoon. That and the email folder. And I think if you're really suffering from imposter syndrome, you need to find someone to talk to. You need to talk to a mentor, or you really need to work with a coach to start to unpick what the root causes of it is.
Yeah. And I think on that, so speaking with other people helped me a lot when it was about overcoming the imposter syndrome. What I found to be extremely useful was very often, I guess, it's easy to go and chat with your friend. But then my friends at the time were not working in the kind of same field as us. They had problems that would not be. So, for example, some of them were teachers, and they would not understand the kind of things we were facing at work. So I found that speaking with someone who works in a similar field, and I think which is why I find doing coaching sessions with you so helpful, Michelle. It's like talking to someone who really understands what it is that you're going through. It makes such a big difference.
Thank you.
Well, thank you both for joining me on the podcast today. It has been an absolute pleasure. I feel like I've been through so many emotions. I felt it with you, Michelle, when you were talking about your past being deactivated, and then with you, Holly, thinking about, I'm just doodling with Excel, and I'm thinking, but we're all doodling with Excel. Do not worry about it. That's what Google is for. And now you have ChatGPT giving you the answers. So yeah, thank you so much.
No, that's been so helpful, and it's been lovely talking to both of you. Thank you.
This has been so much fun. Thank you for having me on the podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Women in Data podcast.
We will be back in a couple of weeks. Until then, we would be very grateful if you could leave us a rating or a review, as it helps us not only to make the podcast more visible, but also to enhance the content.
And if you don't want to miss the next episode, follow us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. We're also on LinkedIn.
Don't forget to register to the Women in Data community. It's free. All you need to do is head to womenindata.co.uk.
Have a great day.